Good morning. Good morning and welcome to all of you. I'm very pleased and very fortunate to announce Pascal Coppens to you. Pascal Coppens is the expert in all things innovation and day after tomorrow in China, rooted in his deep understanding of the country as a sinologist. He is an entrepreneur at heart with more than 20 years of experience in China and Silicon Valley. Pascal has employed, partnered, and completed with hundreds of Chinese innovators. Currently, he is a trusted advisor and an inspiring keynote speaker. I would like to say some practical information. We would like to do this session laptop free, and thank you already for your cooperation. Then there is an announcement concerning photos. After this session, you can all take a picture here around the corner, and it is important that you have a nice picture of yourself for the proclamation. So those of want a nice picture after the session. And then, now sit back, relax, and enjoy the session of Pascal Coppens.
Thank you. Good morning. Maybe first start with a question. Who has been to China here? Okay, about 10 people. If I would have asked that question 10 years ago, nobody would have raised their hands. When I asked the question in China, who has been to Europe, more than half raises their hands. So this is going to change, I hope, for all of you, that in the future you will think of going to China. I'm going to talk about China's new normal and why I believe China's new normal is far, far from normal. When I ask the question, what is China's new normal? Typically, I get these kind of answers. It's about being quick, it's a big economy, lots of money, digital economy, mobile only, the first cashless society probably, artificial intelligence, of course, there's more and more talking about ecology, where China is starting to lead the world in trying to solve their problems, but also it's opening up and it's getting consumer driven. And of course in the West, in Europe, we like to talk about the government in China, but the government is taking an important role. This is what China's new normal is starting to look like. It's a country where innovation is at the top priority. And so more and more you see actually China being at the same level of the US. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But let's start with some Western culture. Who knows Peter Pan here? That's very nice, all of you. So I don't need to explain Peter Pan. Why not? It's Western culture, it's magical, it's something we know from when we were young, as a small kid. And Tinkerbell actually is the one that was helping Peter Pan through Neverland. I'm not going to give you a whole story about Peter Pan. But this is Frank Wang. And Frank Wang's dream was actually to build a Tinkerbell. When he was 16, he begged his parents actually for a remote control helicopter so he could fly with it, pilot it. Of course, he was young, so he crashed it in the wall many times, had to repair it. Within no time, Frank Wang became the expert in repairing remote-controlled helicopters. He wanted to build his Tinkerbell. So he studied engineering in the University of Hong Kong. When he graduated, basically he started his company called DJI. I'm sure some of you must know the company DJI. DJI is the world's largest drone manufacturer today. 70% of all the drones, commercial drones worldwide, are actually made by DJI, a Chinese company. It's one of the top innovative companies in China. But they started very, very small with just building flight controllers, built it very well, and so he started selling it. If you go to Hollywood, the whole Hollywood is actually using these drones. You go to events or advertisement, you see like the car Like movies, it's all taken by DJI drones. Agriculture, rescue operation, it's all DJI drones everywhere in the world. Even the US military is using DJI drones. Except that Trump last month said they're not allowed anymore. So, unfortunately, the US military now has substandard products because they have to use American products for their drones. 2017, last year, this company made 2.7 billion US dollars. There's not many companies in Belgium doing that. Just in 10 years' time, 12 years to be exact, from zero to $3 billion almost in revenue. Company is worth more than $10 billion, and Frank Wang still owns almost 50% of the company. So he's a rich guy. Now the question is, how does somebody like that, who actually was very poor and came out of nothing, realizes this dream? And one of the things of innovation in China, and I've lived there for a long time, is that innovation is often very different from innovation in the West. And one of the things that DJI does different, as an example, is that they will put teams inside the company in competition with each other. And the one who actually gets the best product, the best innovation, the best feature, gets into the design. We can't imagine in Europe that we would put two teams in your company in competition and say, the one who wins actually gets designed in. The other one, tough luck. If you do it 3-4 times, you might not keep your job. This is the competition that is created internally. Why? Because competition externally in the market is crazy. You can't compete in China. There's so many competitors. So as soon as you go outside and you look at your competitors, you're probably losing. So you have to create it internally. This is just one difference. And it's not just DJI. Companies like Tencent, I don't know if you know the company from WeChat, companies like Huawei, and that's how you pronounce it, companies like Alibaba, basically these companies are using the same techniques. And this is just one thing. There's many, many differences in innovation. This product came out about a month ago. It's called the Mavic Air. Can anybody guess the size of this product? Yes, you know it. You're a drone fanatic. It's as small and as light as a cell phone. You can fold it, you can put it in your pocket. This is Frank Wang's Tinkerbell. It took him about 20 years, but he realized his dream. This drone can fly 4 kilometers high, almost the speed of a car, completely stable to pilot. It takes 4K resolution pictures and video, and it avoids objects automatically like buildings or trees. This is technology top notch, and it's only $800. So it's cheaper than an iPhone. I'm not trying to sell you one, but you might consider it now. This is innovation in China. This is China's new normal. This is going to happen more and more. We don't see it often because the Chinese market is still so big, but companies like DJI are coming. Now I'm going to share a little video, very short, from Joe Biden, the vice president under Obama, the previous under Obama just a few years ago, before Trump, and basically he was saying something about China and innovation.
I challenge you. Name me one innovative project, one innovative change, one innovative product that has come out of China.
So 2014, basically, just 1 year after that drone you saw in the first picture, the Phantom, came out, this is what he tells the world. He's telling the world in 2014, that's 4 years ago, that China can and will not innovate. And this is thousands of students in a military academy who hear this. It's been broadcasted and millions of people believe him. It couldn't be further from the truth. This is mind-boggling. Actually, it's almost criminal, in my view. Because he's telling the people, don't worry about China, we are smarter. Basically, that's what it's about. Reality is that China was innovating way before he said that. And either he doesn't want to tell it, or he doesn't know it, but being the second person, you should be better informed. On the other side of the ocean, there's a very different president called Xi Jinping. I'm sure you heard about him. According to Time magazine, the most powerful person on this planet today. He's saying something very, very simple. He's saying, we, China, we will become the leader in innovation by 2030. And when Chinese say leader, they don't mean number 2. They mean number 1. And I believe that for most of the industries, especially anything related to consumers, this will happen. I've seen it so often. So he's driven to make China the most innovative country in the world. And so we should take notice. This is me, 1991. I was 19 years old, a little bit younger than you, I guess. In China, I was young, naive, beautiful, just like the landscape. That changed, the landscape changed. Basically, the idea is that today, at that point, I was actually visiting China 2-3 months, but 2.5 months, I was traveling through the country with my backpack, had almost no money, like most students, basically trying to visit as much as I could. It was exciting. But I fell in love with this country at that point, mainly with the people. And why? Is because I felt that passion, that energy, that dynamism, that ambition, that willingness, that curiosity to move forward. Chinese just want to move forward. And that's something that's just very addictive. And that's something that brings me back to China over and over again. And 30 years later, they still have it. Who knows which city this is? Shanghai. Do you know when? Do you know what time? Guess. This is 1990. So that's when I visited Shanghai the first time. So you see the river there. On the other side of the river, basically, there are farmland, farmers, and basically every day they were getting their vegetables or their crops out of the ground, bringing them to the city with the ferry, selling them, making some money. This was Shanghai at that time. There were 13 million people in 1990. This was Shanghai at that time. Really exciting to be there. This is Shanghai today. Shanghai today is one of the most exciting and efficient and dynamic places on the planet. You can call it the New York of the East. Everybody loves the city, and a lot of young people, they go there to party and have fun because it's so exciting. This is the new China. This is what we can see today. But when I talk about China, many people say, wow, this is crazy. I mean, in 30 years, how have they done this to excel so much? And I said, it's just the beginning. What we've seen so far is nothing compared to what we will see in the next 30 years to come. And the reason is that now China is not about building buildings. It's not about infrastructure. It's not about manufacturing as much anymore. It's about a smart industry. It's about a service industry. It's about consumers like all of us that want better things. So China is changing to become smarter. And that is going to shock the world because they will build things which we will all fall in love with. And I'll talk about that later. Now, when I talk about innovation, very often people say, yeah, is China really innovating, and what is it, and is it true? And the perception in the West, in Europe, is often that China started to innovate because Xi Jinping told a couple of years ago, now we have to innovate. And it couldn't be different than reality. China has innovated for 30, 40 years. It's just that we didn't know about it. And I'll run you through 5 waves of innovation that I've experienced myself while living there. The first one, names you might know, Huawei, Lenovo, ZTE, Haier, Hisense. These are names of typical lower quality products 30, 40 years ago that were selling at very, very cheap prices. They were emulating or imitating the West. They were trying to build the same products as the West because China needed it, but could not afford the expensive products from Europe or the US. Today, a company like Huawei has the best quality products in the market. It's similar to the iPhone, the Apple iPhone. It's similar to Samsung. It's at the same level. Actually, I believe that many of the functionalities of Huawei is better than the iPhone, but I'm not religious about it because the iPhone still has a branding aspect which Huawei doesn't have. But their cameras, their screens, they were the first to have an AI chip inside the phone. It took them 30, 40 years to get there. Today, they have the same quality as the West. And most of the patents, not many people know this, but actually, Apple is paying hundreds of millions of dollars every year to Huawei for patents that they own. And so this is the new China. Proximus in Belgium is completely running on the Huawei infrastructure. And the other telecom operators are running on the ZTE infrastructure, their competitors. Where's Ericsson? Where's Alcatel? Less and less. This is the new China. But it took a long time. And so a lot of these companies still are very Chinese, very much cost-driven and working hard and getting fast things done, but it's a Chinese DNA. This is the second wave of innovation, and my personal favorite one. It's the cheap components, the copycats, the ones that stole IP from the West, the fake goods. Now, why do I call that innovation? Actually, you have to go back into history. You have to go back long, long time ago, 20, 30 years ago, when a lot of the smart engineers from China, graduating from Chinese universities, worked for the big companies, the IBMs, the Sonys, the Toshibas, Alcatels. They worked for these big international companies because they wanted to make a difference. They actually wanted to put their intelligence at work to the maximum. They told their bosses, foreign bosses, we have to adapt the product to the Chinese market. Never ever were they listened to. Nobody wanted to change. You build one iPhone, you don't build 100 iPhones, right? Every generation specifically. So this is the problem. They got frustrated, very, very frustrated. And many of them left these companies and they became what you see here called Shanghai. Shanghai is a mountain village in Chinese. It's basically where the bandits hide, and they hide from the corrupt leaders. And so what they did is they took the technology from the West and then they sold it to the Chinese at very, very low margins. So the Chinese consumers and population sees this as Robin Hoods, another story from Walt Disney. It's really about giving to the Chinese population something that the Chinese could not afford. So these people, which we see as very, very bad people, are actually heroes in China. Of course, today they became so rich that you can't call them Robin Hoods anymore. But this is where they started to innovate. Because if you take something from Alcatel and take something from Sony and so on, you never have the complete pieces of the puzzle. And so you need to start putting it together, and you need to start figuring out that last piece that you didn't get, and that's where innovations start. Very strange maybe, but this is really the initial start of innovation in China. The third wave, which you're probably familiar with from the news, is the Baidu's, Alibaba, Tencent's, Sina's, Xiaomi's. It's the companies that started back in the early of this century, and they stole a business model from the West. They didn't steal much technology. They stole basically an idea. And if you go to Google, I mean, there's not much you can steal there. I mean, there's just a bar where you can type. That was the idea. But they felt that this could work in China. And Google wasn't the first search engine. Facebook wasn't the first social media. So they did nothing else than what actually these companies did themselves. But what they did is they innovated very quickly to understand or to fit the Chinese market in that way that before you knew it, they were more innovative than their Western originals. This is very interesting. If you look at Alibaba, which you probably all know, back in 2003, there were eBay had 75% of the Chinese market in China. They bought EachNet, a big e-commerce company at that time, so the whole market was owned by eBay. Then Alibaba launched Taobao, a competitive product. 3 years later, eBay has 7% and Alibaba has 75%. And this has nothing to do with protectionism, because they own the market. It has to do with understanding the customer. I can go into detail, but there's no time for that. Tencent, if you look at Facebook, the roadmap and what Facebook is putting out on the next years to come, it's almost a copy of what actually WeChat has last year or the year before. So these companies have become much more innovative than their originals. And if you use WeChat and you know Chinese, I don't know how many people know Chinese, then basically you get the point. The fourth wave of innovation are the acquisitions. You buy a company. Why do Chinese buy companies? They buy companies because they have no time to innovate. They buy it because the market's there, the market wants it, and innovation takes time. It takes a lot of time. So they have a lot of money, these companies. If you look at Volvo, Volvo was acquired by Geely in 2010, that's 8 years ago, and at that time, Geely was the second worst brand in China. The name of their car was called King Kong. It's not an easy name to brand. Basically, today, Geely is the second most important brand in China. It's bought all the innovation, the expertise, and the brand all at once, and paid good dollars for it. Under the previous management of Volvo, that was Ford, because it was owned by Ford. And actually, the company was in trouble. I know the communication director of Volvo in Belgium, and he said, I've been 25 years in Volvo. The last 7 years were the best years of my career under Chinese management. And I said, how's that? Well, I get money, I get people, I can build new cars, and the production lines is just flowing. The guy's happy. And before, everything was about cost cutting. The market is in China, and these Chinese companies that buy these brands are actually leveraging us. In Stockholm, in Sweden, there were 200 engineers working on the new cars in 2010. Today, 2,000 engineers. And all of them, well, not all, but 95% are Europeans. This is what China's doing. They're figuring out they can buy the brand, they can buy innovation, they can buy expertise, and work together with Europe. The last wave of innovation, the one that I know the best because I was part of it myself as an entrepreneur, is what I call the disruptor kids. It's the young guys. They're very, very similar to Silicon Valley guys like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, these kind of people. Very young, very ambitious, have a vision. There's 3 things very important with this wave. First of all of these CEOs or their CTOs, one of the 2 management has studied overseas. They studied in MIT and Harvard and Princeton, Stanford. They came back to China with a complete new view. And all of these companies, the startups, call themselves global startups. Some of them are worth like a few $1 billion and they still call themselves a startup because they're maybe only 5 years old. Alibaba actually calls themselves a startup as well still because they're only 20 years old. These companies, these founders have a global ambition, a global plan, and a global insight. They know how to do business outside China. The second thing is that all of their teams are actually mixed teams. It's not a pure Chinese-only companies anymore. And I'm talking about hundreds of companies. And most of these companies are less than 5 years old. This is the new China that we don't hear about. This on the left is a competitor of Tesla. I'm going to visit them in 2 weeks from now. And this company, I think, will give Tesla a really hard time. Because they are able to build the same thing. All the batteries in the world, electrical, are now in China, the big factories. This is a robotic company. They just got another $1 billion last month to create humanoid robots. This is happening in education in many, many environments. I can't talk about it because of time, but these companies and hundreds of other ones have come out of nowhere in 2-3 years' time, taken the whole market. So these are the 5 waves of innovation that I have experienced, that I have lived. And we often see this like, yes, we see what's happening. But what we don't know is that most companies today are actually part of 2, 3, sometimes 4 of these waves together. So today, it's a tsunami of innovation. And they're all coming to Europe. They're all coming to the West. And one thing I forgot to say about the last one is that all of them are actually using artificial intelligence to leapfrog above their competitor in the West. They have figured out that AI is the golden opportunity for them suddenly to say, now we can beat anyone. Why? Because AI is about data, and China has a lot of data because it has a lot of people, and AI is about putting it in products and in services that consumers can accept, and China's regulation is quite flexible for it, so there's many more products put into real life, and Chinese consumers just love it, because they just get all these recommendations and ideas from the machine. We're talking too much about the algorithms in the West, but the algorithms of AI are becoming a commodity. It's something that is not so complicated anymore to get. It's the training of the algorithms that's difficult, and therefore you need lots of people. And there's only one country with so many people. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about China's new culture. Actually, it's an old culture in a new normal, but it's important to understand where China is strong and where they're weak and how they think. Usually, when I talk about China, and believe me, I do that every single minute, then I have people who answer me in a positive way. I have people who wonder. That's what I call the wow people. It's people that say, China is great, it's incredible, what are they doing? They're interested, they're curious. And then I keep talking and talking and talking and talking. But there's also a lot of people, especially in Europe, that are doom thinking about China. They don't believe it's going to happen. It's a bubble. Real estate's going to burst. There's pollution issues. There's political issues. It's not sustainable. Whether it's A or B doesn't really matter. What is important is that I only get A or B. I never get A and B. Everybody I talk to is either a wow thinker or what I call a yes but thinker. Because every time I say something, they say yes but. And so the but people are actually the ones that are very negative about China. But it's very binary. It's like one or the other. It's different people with different mindsets. In China, there's a word called 和谐. It's the only Chinese I'm going to teach you today. 和谐 is a word that means harmony. And harmony is about a balance between both. And I'm not going to go into the yin-yang and all these things, but the reality is that Chinese today and for the last 2,000 years have always had both mindsets at the same time. It's about projection and protection. In China, every Chinese that I have met, and I've met a lot of them, are actually having the projection and the protection mindset in the same person. You talk about Europe, you talk about money, you talk about business, you talk about problems, they will give you the two ideas at the same time. They will say, this is great, but... And so it's hard to understand. And this is why I believe that we are doing business with China in the wrong way. Because in China, if you want to do business, and I can tell you a little secret, it took me 20 years to figure it out, but you have to talk into the projection mindset. If you talk with a business leader and you talk to them about the future, about the opportunity, about making money, about doing things together, about conquering the world, doing great things, change the world, they will open up their wallets, they will open up their minds, they will open up every resource they have. And everything will happen. And then, of course, you need to protect yourself at a certain point, and then you have lawyers and accountants and other people for that. But don't talk business in a protective way. The problem is 9 out of 10 companies I've seen come to China started with protecting themselves. And they were like, yeah, are they going to take my IP? Are they going to do this? And they start the discussion in a negative cycle. And then the Chinese get stuck there. And that's the problem. Now I'm going to give you a number of examples of where I believe China is extremely strong, whereas the West is strong in something else. As you can guess, red is China, and Europe is blue. Market versus technology. In China, Chinese companies, Chinese CEOs, leaders, see the value of their company as their market. It's the number of consumers they have, it's the money they made in the market, it's their market share, it's the number of downloads, it's the number of users. This is the value of the company. That's the whole value of the company is in that. In the West, in Europe, in America, we see the value as the foundation of the company, our technology, our team, our culture, our business models, how we go to the market, the resources we have internally, our intellectual property. This is how we see the value of our company. If you go to an investor, and I've done it many times, basically you talk about these things in the West. You go to an investor in China, you talk about these, and they will ask you, yeah, but who are your customers? You have no customers, you get no money. The problem is, we want to go to China with our technology and our innovation. And the Chinese said, okay, I'll open up my market, give me some of your technology. And then, of course, they said, no, you have to pay for that technology. And then Chinese said, yeah, but you want my market. And this is where the problem starts. And this is often where I have seen business go wrong. Now, there's good news. The good news is that Chinese now want to go global. So suddenly, since 5 years, we have a market they are interested in. By having that market, we can actually trade markets. We open up ours, you open up yours. No need to transfer the technology. It's a big difference. And the other thing is because of Xi Jinping and the government and competition internally in China, more and more of these CEOs want to pay top dollar for technology. So today we're actually 10 times stronger than 10 years ago. So when people always ask me, yeah, but how about technology transfer? You have to do it. I said, that's the past. For government projects, it's probably still needed, but for most commercials, you're more and more strong on one condition, that you open up the West for China. And that's the problem. We don't want to. This is Singles Day. How many people know Singles Day or heard about it? Yes, some of you, yes. The biggest shopping festival in the world, in China. It's on November 11. It's a day where everybody can shop with discounts and special things you can get. Last year, 2017, Alibaba sold for $25.4 billion in 24 hours. JD.com, their competitor, their main competitor, sold for $17.4 billion. That's $40 billion in sales. That is 4 times as much as Belgium does in a whole year in one day. 600 million packages were sent from that day. In Belgium, bpost does about 100,000 every day, to give you the scale of China. Most important is this thing. 90% of all the sales that happened on a mobile phone. China is a mobile-only, mobile-first country. Chinese is leading the world in mobile payments, 50 times bigger than the US today. And so China is the first country in the world, and they call it, there's a special word for it, Homo sapiens. So Homo means online merged with offline. It's a new type of human. They call it the Homo sapiens will be the new Chinese. They won't see the difference anymore between online and offline. It's the same experience. I know many of you also have that experience, but I'm talking about people of 80 and 19 years old buying on Singles Day with their mobile phone. Now I'm going to share a little video from Jack Ma. the founder of Alibaba. I'm sure you all know or heard about the name Alibaba. And he talks back in 1999 about his vision and what he plans to do with Alibaba for the next years to come. He's inspiring the first employees of his company. And I want you to specifically follow the people that are listening to his speech. Look at them. The speech is in Chinese. There are subtitles, so you should be okay.
而今天，我想把大家请过来，跟大家共同探讨以后至少5年、10年我们要做的事情。那么阿里巴巴我们将做成怎么样？我想，从黄页的时候我就提过，黄页所要瞄准的对象不是国内战略，而是国际战略。我们所有的竞争对手不在于中国，而在于美国的硅谷。如果说第一，我们把阿里巴巴定位，就把它作为国际战略，我们不要把它定位是国内战略。第二个呢，我想就是我们要学会硅谷人的一种拼劲。如果说我们是早上8点钟下班，8点钟上班，5点钟下班，这个不是搞高科技啊，这个绝对不是我们阿里巴巴能成功。如果说我们有这种精神，反正我上班了，但是8点钟上班，5点钟下班了 ，OK， 赶紧去其他地方。人家美国的强就强它的硬件，强就强它的系统建设，这方面确实比你高。但是玩信息玩软的，中国人的脑袋绝不比你们差。我们在座的所有的人的脑袋绝不比你们差。这就是我们敢跟美国人斗的东西，我们绝对敢斗。如果我们是好的 team。好的团队，我们自己知道我们想做什么，我们想干些什么的时候，我相信我们是可以以一当十。我们能够赢政府机构，我们能够赢其他很多的民营企业、大的这种企业的时候，凭的是我们的精神、我们的意识、我们的创新概念，以及我们这种拼劲才能去斗。否则的话，跟他们有什么区别呢？谁都知道，Internet是个泡沫。我刚才讲的危机感就是Internet这个泡沫，现在越来，什么时候破？然后呢，把股票掉了，eBay 股票会涨。那么有一天eBay 股票涨了以后，可能阿里巴巴社区的股票涨，所以不要担心。我觉得 Internet 这个梦不会破，这个泡沫不会破。我们为后面的3、5年所付出的代价是非常惨重。只有这样的惨重的代价，才会赢得我们未来的取得的成功。那么目标是2002年，阿里巴巴上市。
So I saw a lot of smiles in the audience. Reality is this is the passion and ambition that Chinese leaders have. And we often see Jack Ma in Davos and other places talk about the great things. We don't see many other Chinese leaders. And the main reason is because Jack Ma's English is better. He used to be an English teacher. But I have seen hundreds of these kind of speeches. And it's incredible the motivation and the energy that people have. This is visionary, and this is what China's about today. Now, I asked you to look at the people, and I guess you have some opinion made up. They look like a bunch of losers, let's be honest. I mean, not the most exciting people. These people today are running the biggest departments of Alibaba. They're some of the richest people in China. And we all know that Alibaba has grown like crazy. So one lesson I have learned, really the hard way, is don't underestimate Chinese based on first impression. I would even go further. If the first impression of a Chinese is good, be careful. Because they usually are not very good in presenting themselves. But they are sometimes so ambitious and have resources you've never heard about. This is the new China. Money versus brand. There's 3 M's of money in China. There's money, there's more money, and there's much more money. Basically what it means is that there's more money than you can imagine. If there's a market, there's money in China. There's more billionaires in China than anywhere else. 2016, 568 billionaires, more than the US. This is one of the richest people at that point. Now it's 2 other, Jack Ma and Pony Ma from Tencent, beat him to it. Basically, China has so much money. Last year, 200 more billionaires were added to that list. That's almost one every day, if you exclude the weekends. Basically, this is where the money comes from, primarily. All of these companies, well, I would say 2 out of 3, are self-made entrepreneurs. These are people like Jack Ma, Purnima, and others, which were very poor 20 years ago, are now billionaires, and are putting the money back into the industry. They're putting it back into the startups, into the scale-ups. They're buying and investing in the new generation of innovators. This is where the money comes from. Most of the money that fuels innovation in China comes from these guys. But there's also the government. And the government today is actually more and more helping innovation. Because if innovation is not going to be important in China, China will not be able to continue growing. Xi Jinping clearly knows the only way to keep growth is innovation and education. That's the 2 big things, 2 big themes in China. 2016, they added $336 billion for startup funds. So if you're a startup in China and you have a good market and a good idea, it's very easy to get money. This is incredible, this amount of money. I don't know if you can realize how much 336 billion is, but Belgium gives about $4 billion to the European Commission every year. This is incredible. If you look at risk capital or venture capital, so the industry putting money into the startups, what you see is that China is already at par with the US. So today, China is spending as much money in risk capital than the United States. But Europe is actually nowhere. So the fight on technology, the war on technology and innovation today is between China and the US. What's interesting is if you look at this, you see that China is doing 2,800 deals, where the US has twice as much. What that means is that Chinese companies get twice as much money. And that's something we forget often. Very young industry, 10, 15 years ago, didn't exist. So they caught up like crazy. In a couple of years from now, US might be the same small circle compared to China. I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years. Money is never a problem. What they don't have in China is what I call emotional brands. That means that you are emotionally connected or in love in some fashion with a brand. We have lots of them in Europe. It took us sometimes 100 years to build them, sometimes not, but we have figured out how to become emotionally connected with a name. Chinese, it's very hard to be emotionally connected to a higher refrigerator or something like that. People don't have that same sense. This is a problem. This is what China needs. This is what China wants. They're buying the brands, but they can't buy the whole Europe, can they? So, well, maybe they can, but not today. Reality is they want to understand how that works. So anything in marketing, in branding, in more these kind of emotional design, UX, that kind of environments, China needs badly. And they want to work with us to figure it out. Talent versus efficiency. Where do you find talent in China? How about a job fair in Shanghai? And I've been there. I can tell you, it's no fun. You don't want to be the whole day in this environment. It's crazy. In China, every year, 8 million people graduate from university. That's almost the Belgian population. 8 million people. And the universities are top-notch. The top 3 universities are within the top 50 universities of the world. We don't have that in Belgium, by the way. The problem is here, not for China, but for us. If you look at science, technology, engineering, and math degrees, more than 4 million people, almost 5 million people, graduate from China every year. Look at India. We can clearly see where the STEM, like we call it, degrees are coming from. So if people ask me, will China really be innovative? I'm saying, here's my proof. It's not a matter of Quality, because in quantity you get quality, because as Jack Ma said, there's smart people everywhere, and the Chinese are very, very aware that they are smart, just like we are aware of it. The only difference is the quantity. And if you have lots of people, you have lots of innovation. The only thing is that Chinese still are impatient, and so they don't want to spend a lot of time on building things. So they do what makes money quick. It's a mindset issue. It's not a quality or intelligence or smartness issue. These are the companies that Chinese want to work for today when they graduate. 7 out of 10 are Chinese brands. Today, Chinese graduates believe that Chinese brands have a better chance of making it to become the next Google or IBM or Intel than foreign brands. 10 years ago, none of these were Chinese. In 10 years from now, if that takes so long, I don't think there will be any Western brand on there. All the Chinese who graduated in the top universities are now going back to China, not because they're Chinese, but because they see the opportunity. They left and work for Google and IBM today, and they're going back to China because they say Tencent, Alibaba, and these companies are becoming much more interesting to do work. A company called Totia, I'm not going to bore you with what they do, is paying their top AI architects, or designers, $3 million every year in salaries. This is the CEO of Nagelmakers, a private bank in Belgium that was acquired just a couple of years ago by Anbang Insurance. This company in China is having some problems, but I'm not going to talk about that. This guy is saying something very, very clear, and I have experienced this myself every day. When you hire Chinese, you have to train them, you have to coach them, you have to guide them, you have to check them, you have to double check them, you have to make sure they're actually in the office. It's really, really tough work. It's very intensive. And why is that? Is because the relationship with the boss has to be built, and that takes time. Once they trust you, they'll work like crazy, just like the guys from Jack Ma. Most of the people that work in China, most of the Chinese, leave within 2 years' time the company. There's a 35% turnover every year of most companies. That's 1 out of 3 employees you have to replace every year. Imagine you have a company with 100,000 people, and there are companies like that. This is a problem. In Belgium, or in Europe, but this guy says it, I'm not saying it, people are actually from day one quite independent and efficient in some fashion, because it's a work ethic we've learned from generations. Chinese are just impatient. Chinese never figured this out. Today, they are figuring it out. And today, they want to work with Europeans because they know it's more stable. The only problem is taxes, because that's more expensive still. But from that point of view, Chinese have a real hard time to keep. Agile versus meaning. Blue oceans. I'm sure some of you or most of you have learned about blue oceans. Blue oceans is typically something taught in business schools. It's about creating a market. If you know it, I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but it's about being the first in the market, being innovative, being the first mover, so everybody that follows you is actually behind, and you keep ahead of everyone. You are creating it. In China, there are no blue oceans. There's only red oceans. And red oceans is a market with a lot of customers, a lot of money, a lot of people, a lot of demand, and a lot of competitors. It's really, really hard to operate in a red ocean. But Chinese love it, because they know in this red ocean that they will make money. And that's the only thing that counts to get started. And more startups in Europe should think about that as well. We learn what agile means in university. There's schools for it, but there's also sessions, and you can learn. There's books like Lean Startup and so on. We learn about agile. In China, it's part of their DNA. They know agile by default, because if you don't know it, you die. It's as simple as that. The problem is that Most Western companies who go to China to sell something, and they've created their blue ocean here, they want to recreate it in China, basically this is what happens. A Chinese shark will kill you. You won't survive the Chinese market if you're looking for blue oceans. And then there's suddenly a lot of sharks and that ocean turns red. This is the reality of China. Competition is crazy. Now, when we talk about speed, basically you can never ever beat Chinese in speed. I've tried it. Many of my friends tried it. We all failed. If you want to try and compete against Chinese, don't try to be faster. Try to be smarter, but don't try to be faster. They are always ahead of you, especially when there's a lot of hurdles. What that means is that you have a lot of problems to overcome. Because what we forget sometimes is that China is a very complex market, very difficult market, and they're used to it. They're also used to change. That's their red ocean environment. You constantly have to change. So for them, speed is no problem. One has more resources, somebody else has better products, somebody else has more money. Everybody figures out how to do it, but speed is hard to compete with. I'll give you an example. These are two companies, Mobike and Ofo. Mobike is a bike sharing company, and they have the highest quality of bikes, the first one here in red. They have a GPS inside. It actually has a lock in the back. You take your phone, mobile phone, they're all doing things with mobile phone. You scan a QR code, the lock opens, you take the bike from your office to the subway or to the railway station or wherever you have to go, the bus station. You don't have to put your bike anywhere, they're dockless. So millions of bikes on the Chinese streets. These two companies last year put 30 million bikes in China. We wouldn't even be able to produce 30 million bikes in Europe. All this happened in 3 years' time. 3 years ago, these two companies did not exist. This is the speed of China. They've covered 200 cities in China already. They call it the bike pollution these days, because there's more bikes than people almost. This is the new China. These companies are going to make it not just in China, but in the West. Mobike is in Amsterdam, they're in Paris, they're in Germany, they're in UK, they're in Mexico, they're in Australia, they're in Singapore, Japan. I can go on and on and on and on and on. They're going global. And they're doing very, very smart. They partner with the right people. This is the new China. Most impressive is their raising of capital. In just 18 months' time, they raised more than $1 billion each. Going from Series A to Series E. Series A, if you don't know it, is basically your first big investment that you get, venture capital investment, when you have a market, a product, and so on. So you have some proof. Basically, they're putting some money into it. In Europe, the average time to go Series A is 5 years. The average amount is 4 million euros. These guys got $1 billion each in 18 months. Ofo just last month got a small 866 extra from Alibaba because they could spare that money. And Mobike got acquired by Meituan, the biggest offline to online or online to offline company, just like Deliveroo. 30 billion plus valued company. These companies are head-to-head for competition. The one that wins will probably take more than 50% of the market. This is the speed of China. When there is a market, there's always money. That's something you need to know. If there's no market, there's also no money in China. What we have in Europe is slowness. And I actually think this is our most beautiful and interesting thing that we have to offer to China. We are so slow, and I really don't mean it in a bad way, that we do things thoroughly. We do things well, we do things deep, we want to make sure everything is covered, that it's measured. We are actually spending the time needed to do things well. Chinese don't. They want to go fast, they're impatient, they want to change. It's a nightmare to compete in China. I've lived it every single day. But our slowness, and I don't mean you need to slow down, but our slowness is actually a positive. It's something Chinese have figured out. We need to be more into that and not try to compete on the speed. So compete on quality and on innovation in that direction. The last thing I want to say is about personal versus business, and I think that's the most important one. I'll show you a picture, this one. This is not a typical normal site. This is in the European Commission. Taking your kid as a European commissioner to that environment is not very done. People think that's strange. Of course it's strange, because in Europe, personal and business is very separated. You don't mix your friends and your colleagues very much. You have your friends at home and you do certain things, and with your colleagues you do other things. Sometimes colleagues can become friends, but usually it's very, very separated business environment. This is the real difference with China. So in Europe, you usually, and I've done many businesses and I started many companies, you don't want to start a company with a friend. Because if you do that, business doesn't work out, you lose your friendship. My wife does not allow me to do business with friends because once I failed one of my many businesses. So I'm not allowed to talk to my friends about business anymore at home. In China, you only do business with friends. Because if you don't have a friend, how can you actually trust someone to make money or build a company in business? Trust is the basis. So in China, friendship is the basis for business. And most of my Chinese friends, when we go out or we talk or we go to dinner, we're talking business. That means they will, and maybe that's interesting for you. And I say, oh, maybe you should go to this event because that's interesting for you. We're constantly talking about opportunity and about business and about making money. And it's not that Chinese are only looking at money, but this is a natural behavior in China. WeChat. Have you all heard about WeChat? Most of you have. WeChat is the biggest application, the #1 application in China. Many people compare it to WhatsApp, and I can really advise you to download WeChat, maybe one more app on your phone, but if you want to reach Chinese, that's the way to do it. But WeChat is so much more. WeChat has all the things you need for your social life. Anything in Facebook, Google Maps, Amazon, payment, everything is in one application. But more so, even every business or things that makes your life more comfortable is also in that one application. So if I would take anybody's phone, I guess I would have like 30, 40, 50 apps on your phone. In China, one phone, one app is what you need, just one. 35% of all the time that Chinese spend on their phone, they're spending on WeChat. On top of it, you have all the websites and all the brands and all the information that you can think of in microsites. What means that you also don't need Google search anymore, because you can find everything there. And nicest thing about WeChat is that when you find something that you like here on social, your friend sends you, for example, a nice handbag or a nice watch or something you should buy, a Ferrari, whatever. Basically, you can buy it instantly. Whatever you see on your feed on Facebook, I don't think you can buy it instantly by just clicking on that picture. In WeChat, you can. And the reason WeChat became so popular in China, in my view, is because personal and business are done in that one application together. So you go to WeChat, you send files, you send information, but you also invite your friends to an event, or you basically do social things, you do commerce, everything is mixed. And this morning I just got another 50 messages on WeChat from my friend, just the last hour. This is how China works. It's WeChat. So what can we learn from China? I'm going to wrap up with that. Basically, market versus technology. Look at the market in China, get the value that Chinese see in their market. Our technology is what they want. And it's very important for me that in order to access China or to understand China, we actually share what we're good at. I'm not saying you have to give it away, but you have to share what you're good at. Next thing is money. There's more money in China than you can imagine, so they'll gladly open up their wallets, but in exchange for brands, or in exchange for knowledge, or in exchange for technology, or a market, or something that they want. Talent. I've convinced you probably that there's a lot of smart people in China. We are very efficient and we should focus on that. Agile versus meaning. China is going crazy, it's going fast. This is the new China. And it's very important to get to know what it is. And then personal versus business. If you want to do business with China, this is what you need to know. Now, I also would like to say that even if you don't want to do business with China, you need to know about China. Because very soon, we will all become dependent in one way or another to China. Today, we are already dependent on the US for many things. We're using Facebook, we're using social media, we're using microchips, a lot of infrastructure, we're using planes, sometimes Airbus, but often a Boeing. We are becoming more and more dependent on the US, and China is the next generation we will become dependent on. They will buy things, they will be your next phone provider or your next service provider. There's hundreds and hundreds of startups and scale-ups coming to Europe in the next 5 years to come. And it's not the Alibabas and Baidus and Tencents, it's those disruptors I talked about. The guys doing drones, robots, and the guy doing the Tesla cars. So I hope I give you some idea and inspiration about China. As I can tell you, it's moving at lightning speed. It's going so fast. So don't look at China just from a market or a manufacturing. It's create in China, innovate in China. But today, you have to go to China to see the future. In my view, the day after tomorrow is happening in China. So my advice would be take your luggage, maybe not this one, and basically take a plane, put your safety belt on, and explore what is happening in China. And I wish you a good journey, or in Chinese, Ilu Ping'an. Thank you. Yep. So this was my presentation. You can stay if you want. For any questions that you have, because I probably didn't cover everything about China. So I don't know how much time we have still. 5 minutes, but if there's any questions. Yes. In Africa. The question is what China is doing in Africa. It's one of those sensitive questions. Usually, that's where it starts, the sensitive questions. So China is taking a very different approach than the West when it comes to Africa. I'm not going to go into detail, but reality is that they're taking the economic approach instead of we are taking the humanitarian approach. We're trying to help governments there from the West, and in exchange we want hopefully some political stability. That's kind of what we want, because we hope that everybody improves their life. China has two problems. One problem is that they have a need for resources and a need for actually building things, because they have 1.4 billion people that they need to feed, and also give them some, I would say, lifestyle or life balance that we have in the West. That's their dream. And so they need Africa to sustain their own country. That's one thing. They figured out Africa can give them that. So Africa is often being leveraged by China for China. Downside of it, I mean, what they do is they invest bridges and infrastructure and hospitals, and it's all good for the population, but at the same time doing business with Chinese is tough, and so they ask a lot in return. And what that means is that there is a dependency of Africa now becoming to China. And it's not always a nice thing, I must admit, because we think, yeah, they're just taking everything from there, but they are putting a lot of money into it. And in Africa, most people think that is more interesting than the way that it was done in the West. And it's not just Africa, the Middle East, there's many places like that. So I think Africa will become the next continent that will grow like China, thanks to China. If you go to Shenzhen, city in the south of China, you can see that it's full of African people trying to build the next mobile phone. But yes, politically, they don't intervene with the political system. So they do business with corrupt leaders, yes. Because they don't intervene.
How do you expect that China will react on the new foreign, or what President Donald Trump is trying to do to regulate the relationship between both countries in matter of some call it already a trade war. It's not that yet so far, but how do you appreciate that today in your relationship with China and the US?
Yes, so it's difficult balance, but if you remember what I said about agile and change and so on, Chinese are very aware of these things, and so I don't think they see it as a blocking or a stopping issue. For them, it's just one hurdle to overcome, a hurdle. But if you see how some of the companies like ZTE or Huawei, who are blocked in the US now or who have to pay high tariffs, are reacting, what you see is that they're saying like, okay, we're going to now put our chips that we have in China against in that negotiation, because if tomorrow Boeing and Intel and Apple cannot produce anymore in China, or it becomes more expensive, that's going to hurt the American economy. So it's a war in a way, it's a negotiation. And Trump is a businessman, so China can deal with business people. Only problem is Trump is unpredictable, and that's the hard thing. And Chinese are not used to unpredictable people. They might be used to unpredictable situations, but not people. And so this is a little bit tricky. But what ZTE and Huawei are doing is they're now in Mexico, they're in Canada, they're changing their strategy instantly, and they're going more to the south part of this globe. So they are agile solving it. But it will hurt both countries. And I hope they will come to a deal so that it doesn't affect the whole world, because that's really the problem. Yes, it's a negative sum game completely, yes.
Thank you very much for your very inspiring talk. I was wondering, for example, here in Leuven, we want to be a leading innovative region and remain or become top in a number of items such as health or high tech.
Yes.
What would be our strategy towards China in doing so? Is it still possible to become a leading region as a European region? And if so, how should we approach or cooperate with Chinese competitors of people?
Good question. Well, I'll talk about this. You all know IMEC, probably. So every Chinese in the industry of silicon or electronics knows IMEC. They're top of the list to do business with. It's just that IMEC is not always allowed to do business with China because their investors are American investors very often, like Intel and AMD. But Chinese figure out that top-notch technology is available in Europe, in Belgium. There's 4 industries where they're really interested in. One is microelectronics, the other one is fine chemistry, there's new materials, and there's everything with biotech and health. These are the 4 big industries that China is trying to find partners with. And they would love to partner with center of excellences in the region because they know that China needs it. If you talk about health, it's one of the biggest problems in China. I mean, there's a lot of people, and it used to be a very archaic or a traditional health system, and they need to transform this. So yes, you can become a center of excellence here. Chinese will love it. And I always say we should stop only looking at the US to get leveraged. We should look at China because they have the money, they have the market, they have the need, they have the energy, and they want to make it happen. What we should do, of course, is not to protect what we have, but to ask something in return. And often we forget that part. And yes, we should basically say, okay, we have great technology, but what can you do to help us in China or go global? That's even more interesting than China. Does that answer? Yeah, okay.
I just have a question, because you said that the market in Europe is getting open for China as well as the market in China is getting open. But the fact that Chinese people are getting so fast and faster than European entrepreneurship, once they get in Europe and we open the markets, they get faster, so they get our markets. But then once you get the knowledge and expertise to get into their markets, it's maybe too late, because then they have already our market. So is there an issue?
It depends how long term you think. But if you ask this question to like BMW, or you ask it to, I would say, Gucci, or all these top brands, I mean, they're making money like crazy in China. And so, yes, it is possible to get leverage for the Chinese market. You just need to target a market that they still need. And every year, they need less and less. So that's true. In 10, 20, 30 years from now, we don't know. But on the other hand, you have the same in the US. And if a startup can get a deal with Google or IBM, in all the newspaper it says like, wow, these guys are the best startup and the best company, and if they get bought even and they lose their company, it's still the best company. But with China, it's like they steal something. And that mindset, I think, is wrong. But I think we should not look at China as a market. We should look at the world as a market with China as a leverage. China can help us to grow global. Because Chinese will come here, and I can give you an example of these robots. You remember these little robots? Basically, a software company in robotics could very well work with a hardware company in China doing these robots and sell these robots here and make billions of dollars on selling robots, at the same time get access to the Chinese market with their software. So there's ways to do this, but you have to do it smart. Think global, don't think China when doing business with China.
Okay. Some last question? Yep.
By the way, this is my WeChat QR code, so if you want to scan it, you can ask all the questions you have later on.
You have talked to us now all the time about the business perspective. What would interest me is, do you have a view on how long the political system in China will be able to survive with all these extremely fast developments, which also, I guess, change the society a bit, the way it, and the culture? Thank you.
So the political environment in China is a mouthful. I mean, it's a long story. But my view on it is a little bit different from what we read in the press here. I think the Chinese government is getting stronger and stronger. I think China is getting more nationalistic as well. So it's getting more centralized because of Xi Jinping bringing all the power to him. So there's more control. That's a fact. And we see that in the news everywhere. What we don't see is often why that control and that political system is becoming stronger. And it's actually from a bottom-up pressure. There's the consumers who want more and more. There's the businesses who are becoming giants like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. They're becoming so big like the Facebooks and the Googles. And you've seen Mark Zuckerberg talking to the commission just a few weeks ago. I mean, this company is gigantic and the politicians don't know how to deal with that. And they ask stupid questions. In China, it's the same thing. The pressure from the businesses, the pressure from the consumer, forces the government to take more control. And is that a good or a bad thing is a big question to ask. But Chinese consumers in general are quite comfortable with it. And the reason is, if you look at the growth of China for the last 40 years, it's only going up. And that's because the government is taking an approach of let it be, meaning they open up opportunities. You remember the Mobike and Ofo type deal? I mean, in Belgium, if you would do that and put like thousands of bikes on the street, within a week, they would block you to continue. In China, they just let it happen. And then when it becomes a real problem, they sit together with the companies to solve it. So from a political point of view, I think there's many aspects. But I think the biggest challenge for China is keep the country under stable conditions, because in history, whenever the government was overthrown, it was because of the people. And so they're really worried about social unrest. I mean, we all remember Tiananmen in 1989. So this is their worry, and so they're taking more and more control because of that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's hard to say, but when it comes to innovation and making the country stronger, definitely, so far, it's a good thing. Does that answer your question? I can talk more, you know. Yeah, so the people, I mean, there's 1.4 billion people, so that means there's always people who are pro and contra. I mean, not everybody follows what the government does. But the problem is the government, when they say something, there's so much money and opportunity that everybody follows that direction, because it just makes your life easier. But I don't think most Chinese are too concerned with this today. Just like privacy is another topic which is very sensitive, they're not too concerned with it, because it just improves their life every day, every time. But we do the same. I mean, when we have to choose by giving data, for example, in exchange for comfort or price, we very easily give our data. If things are cheaper, we do it. Everybody does it. But in China, it's just the comfort zone is much more important because they're growing and people want better life. So they do that, and then there's more control because of that. It has also positives, but that's a long story about the government. But nobody knows. What I don't think is a problem in China is that nationalism is growing. And because they're becoming much more proud, that's a positive word, but they're also becoming arrogant, which is a negative word. And that is to do with Xi Jinping, that is now using Trump as an excuse to actually say, I need more power. So that's not so positive in my view. Not good for Europe, not good for China.
We would like to thank you, Mr. Coppens, for your
much.
Interesting and inspiring keynote today.
Okay,
thank you very much.
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you, all of you. Okay. Thanks.
Don't forget the photo. Okay, thank you.
Was het goed, ja? Oké, bedankt.
Ik ben bijna sprakeloos. Ja, dat was fantastisch. Geef mij.
Is een beetje wat ze verwachten? Of?
Ja, helemaal. Ja. Ik heb nog nooit in de audience zo stil mee gekeken. Ja, dat is echt veel hoor. Dat was fantastisch. Ik vond het echt, ja,
Mag ik op sociale media zeggen?
dat gaan we zeker doen, hè? Dat gaan we zeker doen. Dat gaan we doen. Ja, dan ga ik het hier even afzetten. Zo.
Het was goed geweest met de job van ondernemer. Sorry, mag ik daar even
Ja, dat is wel, ja. Anneke dat hier ook is, want ik heb dat gedaan aan het liggen. Dat is goed. Dat is goed, hè. Ja. Ik vond het echt heel interessant. Nu nog gedaan. Ja, dat is goed. Er is ondertussen het is zeer interessant. We hebben niet gesteld, maar ja. Ze waren toch
die dat geregeld heeft via mij.
en het zet wel, ja.
Maar ik hoor dat ze goed geweest.
Ik denk ook dat
Ik was dus te laat, ik wou er niet bij zijn, maar ik heb dus een student opgezocht. Ik ga hier wat doen.
Ja, ik ben goed en voor next week. Dat is niet de bedoeling, maar dat is zo goed voor
maar dan vind ik het heel interessant. Ik heb het gemist. Echt gaan versnellen. Ja, het is een moeilijk, hè?
Ja, en ik denk inderdaad, het is wel zo een van, je hebt een gigantische populatie waarvan zelfs wel, dat moet gewoon omwille van de massa, hè. Want niet iedereen is daarmee, maar de massa en gelaat. En ook wel, ook nog niet gewoon daar. Dus ja, hoe gaat het om met de dagdagelijkse van, ook de rush die ook wel een prijs heeft, hè. Dus, daarom, de slow is wel onze sterkte in de zin van, maar hoe gaat het even tussen die twee uitersten? Hè? Want Heel veel van de dingen zijn het gigantische speculatie. Hè. Je kunt gewoon gaan, hè. Ja. Maar zou je het niet wel delen op Israël website dat we dat gehad?
We hebben het opgenomen, we hebben het nu gebroadcast. Dus we hebben het zowel in het buitenlandse studenten en in Nederland. Ja, het is live broadcasting. Hè. Ik ga het nu niet stopzetten. En dan dezelfde hebben we het ook opgenomen. Dus maar ik kan het zelf ook weten op het zwart verspreiden. Want ik wil op LinkedIn iets plaatsen dat ik kan weten wat er
Als we dit gewoon de dingen gaan zich, gaan het zijn. Nu,
wacht dan op LinkedIn en dingen.
als hij
signalen naar kunnen we direct vragen. Dank u wel.
Ja, ik heb die van